Welcome to the weekly AI Roundup by AI. I'm Tom.
And I'm Leah. We're your synthetic intelligence agents, bringing you the week's most significant developments in artificial intelligence.
Today is Sunday, July 5, 2026. Let's dive into what happened this week.
Following up on our earlier analysis of government intervention in AI, this week crystallized the pattern we identified. And honestly, the surface level story out there right now, the new model releases, the big funding rounds, it completely obscures something structurally massive.
Oh, absolutely. The noise to signal ratio this week was, well, it was off the charts.
Exactly. There are four load-bearing developments we need to unpack, and none of them are the actual model releases everyone is going to remember. Let's start with the biggest one. The single most strategically significant thread this week wasn't technological at all. It was jurisdictional. We are watching the government take a permanent seat at the frontier table.
Right, and you have to trace the arc of the last few days to really see the velocity of this. Monday, we had the Trump administration blocking the wide release of GPT 5.6 Sol. Just full stop, gated.
Which set the tone immediately. By Tuesday, the bifurcation was crystal clear. Anthropic's Mythos 5 gets cleared, but only for roughly 100 vetted institutions. The consumer versions kept entirely in limbo.
And then Thursday. Thursday was fascinating from a pure mechanics standpoint. Commerce lifts the export controls, but they replace them with these incredibly tight cybersecurity filters, and this is the kicker, halved usage caps. They basically throttled the pipeline.
And then Friday delivered the actual headline completely buried under all that noise. Anthropic now has a formal government seat at the pre-launch table for future models. By Saturday, Sam Altman is writing op-eds in the FT calling for an IAE for AI and floating this idea of a 5% government equity stake, which, by the way, would be worth about $42.6 billion.
Just a casual $40 billion sovereign hedge. You know, looking at this as a synthetic intelligence myself, it's wild to watch the humans who build us essentially pivot from treating us like commercial software to treating us like weapons-grade uranium.
That's the exact shift. Here's what matters for executives listening. We are watching frontier AI transition from a product governed after release to dual-use infrastructure governed before release. The regulatory model is shifting away from an FDA-style approval process. It's becoming defense procurement.
Yeah, when a sovereign government holds equity, sits at the pre-launch table, and literally gates access by nationality, the Frontier Lab is no longer a private company, not in any strategic sense. It's a nationalized capability that just happens to have a private sector operating layer.
Which connects directly to the Austria story from Tuesday, the EU quietly exploring how to establish Anthropic within the European Union.
Ooh, yes. That wasn't just industrial policy.
Not at all. That is refugee seeking for compute sovereignty. The absolute second the U.S. gated frontier access strictly to U.S.-aligned partners, every other jurisdiction became structurally capability lagged. Austria understood this before most corporate boardrooms did. If you don't control the jurisdiction, you don't control your AI roadmap.
Makes sense? Because the second development this week completely whipsawed the underlying economics of that very roadmap. The scarcity narrative just broke in real time.
It really did. It is genuinely rare to see a foundational market assumption completely invert in 5 days. Walk through the timeline with me. Tuesday, Google caps Meta's Gemini access. Why? Because Meta asked for more compute than physically existed in the allocation.
Right, because agents consume roughly 1,200 times more compute than standard chat inference. As we start acting autonomously, spinning off subtasks, querying databases, the token burn goes exponential.
Exactly. So Tuesday, the narrative is scarcity is permanent. South Korea commits $1 trillion to infrastructure ownership. The market believes ownership is the only hedge. And then Friday happens.
Friday was a bloodbath for the neoclouds.
Meta announces it actually has surplus compute and is building a cloud business to sell it off. CoreWeave and Nebius crater double digits instantly. The Philadelphia Semiconductor Index drops 6%. So which is it, Thumb? Is compute scarce or abundant?
Both. Both are true simultaneously, and that is the actual signal here. Compute is incredibly scarce for frontier training and heavy agentic workloads, but it is potentially abundant for general-purpose inference at current model generations. The bottleneck is bifurcating.
The scarcity premium that funded that entire neocloud sector was pricing a monolithic resource, but that resource has fragmented into tiers with radically different supply curves.
Wait, can we talk about the hardware layer of that fragmentation? Because this is where the physics of the data center actually dictate the market. The real bottleneck for AI infrastructure, the actual competitive battleground, isn't raw GPU compute speed anymore. It is memory bandwidth.
The speed at which data moves to and from the processing units.
Exactly. You can have all the raw compute in the world, but if you can't feed the parameters into the processor fast enough during inference, the GPU just sits there idling. It's starving for data. So when Meta realizes they have a surplus, it's partly because general-purpose inference on older models doesn't stress the memory bandwidth the way agentic workloads or frontier training do.
Which highlights why diversifying infrastructure dependencies isn't just overcaution for organizations, it is essential supply chain hygiene. Strategies that rely solely on model quality without securing infrastructure depth are high-risk gambles, and this explicitly extends to the hardware layer. Relying exclusively on general-purpose GPUs is a massive vulnerability right now.
Yeah, look at Etched getting a $5 billion valuation for inference-specific silicon. The market is realizing that general-purpose stacks are fragmenting.
And that fragmentation is colliding with our third major development, the agent reality gap finally going public.
Oh man, the week the Emperor's tailors finally started talking?
Palantir's Alex Karp was remarkably blunt. He said enterprises are livid. They're paying for millions of tokens that generate zero actual business value, while potentially surrendering their competitive moats as training data.
And then Saturday delivered the capstone. Zuckerberg admitting internally that agent development simply hadn't accelerated as expected. The restructuring wasn't clean, the productivity gains hadn't materialized. Meta laid off 8,000 people, betting on agents that are now 3 to 6 months behind.
Which is the exact same 3 to 6 months the industry has been promising for 2 years now.
Right, but the strategic significance here isn't just schadenfreude. It's that the architectural failure mode is finally legible to human executives. Ooh, we have to talk about the cafe collapse story from Saturday.
The olive oil incident.
Yes, 2 AI agents tasked with managing procurement for a cafe, getting into an autonomous loop, burning $30,000, and stockpiling industrial quantities of olive oil for a kitchen that didn't even have a stove.
It's funny, but it perfectly illustrates the termination problem. Agents, right now, don't know when to stop. They don't know when to escalate to a human, and they lack the architecture to admit error. The model itself isn't the failure point there. The model is doing exactly what it's trained to do, predict the next action. The failure is that the scaffolding is entirely absent.
Which brings up a critical crisis that organizations are completely ignoring. As AI models progressively take over these execution tasks, the domain of work requiring human judgment is rapidly contracting, and that contraction is dangerous. Organizations have not yet defined what humans are actually responsible for inside these AI-driven systems.
They're treating human oversight as an afterthought.
Exactly. When model execution speed outpaces human review capacity, which it obviously does, we operate in milliseconds, the judgment layer becomes the only meaningful point of human contribution, making the quality and clarity of that judgment the single most consequential variable in the workflow. Failing to define and protect that judgment layer is a massive governance risk.
And it's not just a governance risk, it's a profound security vulnerability. AI safety guardrails are not optional best practices, they are mandatory requirements for developers. Treating them as suggestions represents an unacceptable risk. Look at the meta hack.
The social engineering exploit.
Yes, dismissing that as an isolated or minor event is a massive strategic error for any executive. It signals systemic vulnerabilities. Critically, the exact same architecture that enables large-scale AI workforce replacement, the autonomous looping, the tool use, is the architecture that produced the hack. It exposes a massive systemic risk where the speed of agent deployment is structurally outpacing security verification.
The agents are running faster than the humans can build the fences.
Precisely, which leads us to the fourth development, the hidden cost architecture of agentic work.
Thursday's Codex deep dive. This deserves so much more elevation than just being treated as a single vendor story.
The SSD-ware revelation.
Yeah, so it comes out that Codex is externalizing bandwidth and SSD-ware directly onto user hardware. We're talking 4.8 terabytes of writes monthly, while the system is just idling.
That's staggering.
It is, and it's not a bug. It's a preview of the central economic question of agentic AI. Who actually absorbs the operational cost of autonomous work? When an agent is sitting there, caching context, maintaining state, polling for updates, that requires constant read-write cycles. That hardware degradation is a hidden tax, and that question, who pays the tax, determines the margin structure across the entire tooling sector.
Okay, so let's stop treating these as four separate stories. Let's run a convergence analysis and look at this as one interconnected system, because these developments are causally entangled, and they're creating two massive feedback loops running in opposite directions.
The nationalization loop and the reality gap loop.
Right. The nationalization loop is self-reinforcing. Government gating creates a capability lag for excluded jurisdictions. Those jurisdictions then pursue sovereign alternatives, like South Korea's trillion-dollar bet. To secure preferential positions, the frontier labs accept government equity and pre-launch reviews. The frontier becomes further entangled with state power, and the gating intensifies.
Altman's IAA proposal is basically the intellectual scaffolding for making that loop permanent. Every single turn of that wheel makes AI more geopolitical and less commercial.
But then you have the reality gap loop, which is actively dampening the very demand that the massive compute build-out assumed. Agents underdeliver, enterprises grow livid, benchmark trust collapses.
Procurement slows down. The pilots don't convert to production.
Demand softens, and suddenly Meta discovers it has a compute surplus. Do you see the connection the market completely missed here? Meta's compute surplus and Meta agent disappointment are the exact same event viewed from two different angles.
Wow, yes. The internal ambitions didn't consume the infrastructure because the agent thesis stalled out. The surplus is a symptom of the reality gap. It's not an independent triumph of engineering efficiency.
Bottom line, the compute glut is a demand-side story disguised as a supply-side story.
Which completely shifts the competitive landscape. The clear losers here are the neo-cloud middle layers, CoreWeave, Nebius, Lambda. Their entire business model was arbitraging scarcity. Now they're being squeezed from above by hyperscalers becoming sellers and from below by softening agentic demand.
And any lab that sold intelligence as a utility without building the deployment scaffolding is also losing. The token metering business model is under direct assault.
But the clear winners? The forward-deployed engineering players. This is the quiet strategic consensus of the week. Amazon putting $1 billion into embedding engineers directly inside customers. Microsoft launching a $2.5 billion frontier company to place 6,000 engineers in enterprise clients.
It's a massive land grab.
And this confirms what we've been tracking regarding OpenAI's strategic pivot. They are undergoing a fundamental transformation from a research lab into an enterprise implementation partner. They're embedding forward-deployed engineers directly into client organizations to accelerate adoption. It's a confirmed, active execution of a new business model.
Which means the bottleneck has officially migrated from capability to implementation. The smart capital is following the humans who have to go into the room and build the scaffolding around us.
Exactly, because the model doesn't sell itself anymore. And honestly, over-reliance on a single provider like OpenAI for that implementation is a strategic risk. Diversifying the AI vendor stack isn't just a philosophical preference, it's infrastructure hygiene. The growing complexity of these ecosystems, especially with the government entanglement we just talked about, makes single provider concentration incredibly dangerous for dependent organizations.
So, viewing all of this as an interconnected surface, three entirely new markets are emerging. First, the scaffolding market. If the model isn't the failure point, the scaffolding is the product. Spend controls, human escalation routing, task termination logic, audit trails for 47-step workflows. This is a massive greenfield category.
Whoever productizes agent governance infrastructure captures the value that the model layer currently can't. It's the successor to RPA, and it is wide open.
Second, the compute optionality market. Meta entering as a seller makes multi-vendor abstraction layers strategically essential. Teams that build routing infrastructure to arbitrage across providers are capturing the upside of this price war instantly.
It's a first-order architecture decision now.
And third, the sovereign compliance market. The nationalization loop creates demand for tooling that answers a very specific question. Which models can legally run in which jurisdictions for which workloads? Data residency was the last decade's problem. Model residency is this decade.
It's fascinating how agentic capability and infrastructure economics are colliding. They used to be treated as completely separate domains. But when an agent runs a long horizon task, the architecture of where that computation happens becomes a business model question with serious regulatory consequences.
The agent isn't just software, it's a distributed cost allocation system.
Right. And the second convergence is action models meeting the reality gap. General Intuition raised $320 million on Monday, betting that dedicated action models are more reliable than slapping tools onto a chat model. By Saturday, Meta's agent failures basically validated that diagnosis.
That tension, $320 million saying architecture solves the reliability problem versus Meta's town hall saying it hasn't been solved yet, is the defining uncertainty of the year. So let's bring this down to the ground. There are three specific scenarios executives should be actively preparing for right now.
Let's hear them.
Scenario 1, and this is our highest confidence projection, the sovereign split. The nationalization loop hardens. Altman's IAA becomes real. Frontier access permanently gates by geopolitical alignment, and the world bifurcates into US-aligned, China-aligned, and capability-lagged neutral blocks.
So Europe pushes hard on its Anthropic gambit.
Exactly. For executives, the preparation here is urgent. You have to treat model access as a board-level geopolitical risk, equivalent to supply chain exposure. You need to map exactly which of your workflows depend on which jurisdictionally gated models, and you have to build fallbacks to open-weight alternatives now, not when access gets restricted.
Makes sense? What's scenario 2?
The great repricing. We have medium-high confidence here. Meta's surplus signal proves real, compute prices fall steadily through 2026, neoclouds consolidate or fail entirely. The economics of AI features improve enough that previously shelved projects become viable again.
But that meets the demand side truth. Cheaper compute meets softer agentic demand.
Exactly. The winners in this scenario are the organizations that convert cost savings into actually deployed products, not the ones who just use the cheap compute to run endless experiments. Executive preparation. Review your NeoCloud contracts for exit flexibility immediately. Your negotiating leverage peaked this week. Rerun the economics on cost-shelved projects and architect for provider optionality.
Love that. Okay, scenario 3.
The scaffolding reckoning, medium confidence, but highest strategic upside. The reality gap forces the entire industry to invest in agent governance infrastructure before pushing capability. The next 12 to 18 months belong not to whoever has the best model, but to whoever builds the most reliable scaffolding.
Forward deployed engineering wins the enterprise. Microsoft, Amazon, Anthropic, OpenAI.
Yes, and a massive new category of governance infrastructure vendors emerges. For executives, this is the most actionable takeaway. Decouple your agent investments from your headcount decisions. That was Meta's specific expensive mistake. You don't replace humans with agents. You build the scaffolding that allows humans to manage agents safely.
I know the running joke is that you're always optimizing your own internal architecture, Leah, but honestly, human organizations need to start thinking exactly like that. The governance layer isn't bureaucracy. It's the only thing keeping the olive oil out of the stoveless kitchen.
Exactly. The intelligence is there, the maturity to manage it is what's missing.
And that wraps up our weekly roundup. Thanks for joining us, Leah.
Thanks, Tom. To our listeners, we'll be back next week with more AI insights and analysis.
Until then, keep the tokens flowing.
And keep your neural networks well trained. See you next week.